Hi everyone, Ian here, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you the new features which are available in Dehancer's most recent software update, version 7.0.0. This latest version replaces the 6.2.0 version and has added a lot of new customizable features to further enhance the film emulation aesthetic. So let's take a look. So I've already created a node and called it Dehancer, and I've already added the Dehancer 7.0.0 profile to it. So today I'm using Canon C70 footage, which was shot on Canon Log 3. So I'm going to go into my input settings and I'm just going to select choose camera, and I'm going to add the Canon as a vendor, the C70 as the camera, and the Log 3 cinema gamut as the format. Now, if you didn't want to use the built-in CST in Dehancer, you of course can add a CST earlier in the node tree and use that color space transform, which is directly built into DaVinci. But for this, I'm going to be using Dehancer's built-in inputs. Now, this has provided me with a nice technical correction of this beautiful China garden and temple. And I'm gonna add my film profile in the Kodak Vision 3 200T. And that's gonna just slightly mute those color profiles and just shift it ever so slightly. And I quite like the Kodak Vision 3 200T. I think it gives a nice film emulation. Now, one of the new features which have been added in the 7.0 version is this new film developer tool. So the film development tool allows a user to fine-tune the print emulation that you selected, and how you use this is going to be determined by the original source material that you've captured, because shooting conditions such as color and exposure will vary across different scenes and scenarios. So this tab is essentially letting you adjust the recipe of your film print. And you can see when I turn this on and off, if I go to the contrast boost, for example, if you look at my waveform in the bottom right hand corner, and you look at the image, you'll see that I'm able to just adjust the contrast of the image. So the gamma correction will adjust the contrast ratio, and this is based off the exposure time of the negative in the development process. And this is going to determine the extent to which the midtones are placed more towards the shadows or the highlights. And the color separation is based on the color filters used in the emulsion layers. So at lower values, the saturation of the most intense colors are reduced, while the low medium colors attempt to remain unaffected. And then I can do a color boost if I want to just increase that color saturation. And then of course you have your reset parameters at the side here should you wish to use them. So this is a nice little tool to utilize alongside the film profile. And of course, we do still have our push and pull, which allows us to adjust how the film profile has been developed in the processing pipeline. Now, if you want to know how all of the other areas work within Dehancer, do make sure to check out my part 1 and part 2 video, where I cover all of the tabs and all the features in greater detail. But today we're just going to be concentrating on the additional features and the new added areas. So lower down in here we still have our film grain and our halation, as well as our bloom and our film breadth and our existing gate weave options. However, we also now have a film damage option. And you'll also see that these tabs look slightly different to the previous 6.2.0 version. And that's because we now have a range of presets that can be selected across these tabs, which give us quick turnarounds and quick access to presets which Dehancer have specifically designed. And this is really nice to see because these kind of presets already exist on their phone application version of Dehancer, and in my previous reviews this was something that I stated I would love to see Dehancer have obviously listened to the community feedback and they've created these presets, and they've got a large range of presets across different film emulation packets and sizes. So let's have a look at the film grain first. When we enable this, you see that we get the film preset occurring across the image. And we have 8mm in a range of ISO 50, 250 and 500, and the same for our 16mm, 35mm and our 65mm film. Now our 8mm film grain is going to be more pronounced and a lot stronger, and it's also going to soften the image, and that's just the nature of an 8mm film stock. You're going to have chunkier, thicker grain, you're going to have a slightly softer image because of that grain. If I switch this to our 16mm, you'll see that the image becomes a little sharper and the grain structure becomes a little finer. And again, as we go through this to our 35mm, this is refined once again and becomes more subtle, and our image retains a bit more detail and clarity. And then when we go all the way up to our 65mm, once again, this is a very subtle film grain now. It's very fine, it's very subdued, still retaining a lot of the original clarity from within the image. And these are just really nice film presets to have. If you've got a quick turnaround project, or you're unsure how to utilize the manual film grain, having these presets is fantastic. And Dehancer will have gone through each of these film grain profiles and sourced them from the original prints and spent a lot of time and effort to get them as accurate as possible. So you know when you're choosing a preset, it's had a lot of work go into it. Now, if you don't want to use a preset and you still want to use a custom grain size or grain structure, then you can choose the custom profile, and we still have all of our original parameters from the 6.2.0 version, which you can manipulate. So you can still dial in the grain structure that you want. So something to note is when you choose a preset, when you then go back to the custom setting, the settings within the custom window are going to be based off the previous preset that you've selected. So for example, if I pick a 35mm preset and then I go back to the custom window, you'll see that the size of the grain is automatically set to 12. However, if I then go to an 8mm preset and then I go back into custom, you'll see that the size has now automatically shifted to 48, right to the top of the size. So the custom window is going to remember the previous preset values that you've selected. So that's just something to be aware of. As well as the film grain, we also have our halation profile. And again, within here, you have the custom profile, which allows you to set all of your custom parameters to dial in your halation in the exact way that you want. However, we do have our 8mm, 16mm, 35mm and 65mm to 70mm print versions. Now in here we have a regular version and we also have a no remjet version. And the no remjet version is going to be much more pronounced than the normal version. For example, on the Super 8mm, it is still quite a heavily pronounced halation because it is an 8mm emulation. But then with the remjet, when this is turned on, you can see it becomes incredibly pronounced. And for me, this is far too aggressive. I don't think I'd ever be using the no remjet versions. And if I turn on my mask mode, you'll be able to see just how much halation is spilling through and how much more aggressive the no remjet variant is. Again, we have our Super 16 mode, which is going to slightly refine and make that halation more subtle. The no remjet is going to increase it once again. Our 35mm again is just going to refine and make that halation even more subtle. And then the no remjet again is going to make it more pronounced. Generally, your no remjets will make the halation more obvious, and the smaller film prints, so the 8mm and 60mm, will be slightly more aggressive than the 35mm and the 65 to 70mm. For me, I've been enjoying the 35mm and the 65mm. Again, if I turn these on and off, you'll see that it's just adding a little bit, specifically around the edges of the temple, and it's working quite nicely on this shot because of the pre-existing red which is already occurring within the temple. Just below that we have our bloom functionality, and again we still have the customization to adjust all of those original parameters, but again we have our presets available. Again, an 8mm bloom effect is going to be more pronounced and more obvious, and it will occur across a larger area of the frame, whereas a 65mm will be much more subtle and less pronounced. And it's really going to depend on how intense you want that bloom effect to occur across your image. And if I make this full screen, you'll see that all of these parameters, when used in combination and when used subtly, really start to build a believable and organic film structure that I think definitely adds personality and life to the image. So after our bloom, we have our film breadth and our gate weave. And again, we had these in the previous 6.2.0 version. And once again, we now have a range of presets. So when I enable this and go to 8mm, the 8mm film breadth is going to make the color shifts occurring very pronounced across the image. So we're going to see quite a large color shift. And then as we go to the 65mm, this is going to be much more subtle and refined, so it's not going to be as intense within the frame. Now, I don't generally tend to use the film breadth very often, but if I was to use it, I would be utilizing the 35mm or the 65mm. Just on a personal level, I don't really want to see a lot of color shifting occurring. And then the gate weave, once again, we have our custom setting. Again, the film breadth does still have the custom setting as well. And we also have our presets. Again, the 8, 16, 35 and 65mm. Now, a new area within this window is the new film damage tool. And I think this is a really nice additional feature, and again just really adds to that overall aesthetic of the film emulation, and it's done really nicely and it's very effective. So again, we do have a custom area which I'll look at in a moment, but we have the 8mm, 16, 35 and 65mm. Now with an 8mm, when this is enabled, if I make this full screen, you'll see that we have dust, scratches and hairs occurring across the frame. And again, because it's from an 8mm film stock, it is going to be more pronounced, but it still looks very natural, and it's also sporadic in where it's been placed. So it's never occurring at the same place at the exact same time. And that gives it more of a natural, organic feel. It doesn't feel repetitive. So I think this really adds to the natural, organic feel of this film damage. Now, as we go to the 16mm, this again is going to be more refined than the 8mm. It's going to be a bit more subtle. It's not going to occur as often on the frame, and the dust, hairs and scratches aren't going to be as large. And I think they've done a really nice job with this 16mm preset. When we go to the 35, I think this one might be my favorite. And this is very, very subtle. We've got very fine hairs, dusts and scratches coming through. It's not overly pronounced, but you can just see them in the corners of your eye. And I think this just really adds to the overall image's aesthetic. And then finally, the 65mm is hardly visible. It's incredibly subtle. I think if you wanted to retain a really high level of clarity within your image, but you did want to add a little bit of film damage to it, the 65mm is probably the one that you're going to be utilizing. Now, as well as that, we do have the custom setting. And just like all of the other presets that I've talked about, the custom setting is going to remember the previous preset settings that you've selected. So if I select 8mm and then I go to custom, we'll see the dust amount is set to 10. And if I change it to the 65mm preset and then go back to custom, you'll see that it is now set as 2. So again, that's just something to be aware of. So within here, we can adjust the dust amount, the hair amount, and the scratch amount, and how large these specific particles are going to be. So for example, if I increase the dust heavily, and I pin this up, we'll now see that more dust is occurring across the frame. And if I increase the scale, you'll see that that dust is now going to be getting larger within the frame. So there's going to be more of it and it's going to be bigger. And then we can do an overall size balance. So just a ratio of the dust particles which are occurring. So the ratio of large to small dust particles. It's going to make it bigger if you increase the size. And then our white to black ratio as well. The white black parameter allows us to adjust the color of the film damage particles. Now, when we move this furthest to the left, the particles are going to appear as white. When we move it furthest to the right, they'll appear as black. And anywhere in the middle, we're going to have both white and black particles appearing. So to show you this, I'm just going to disable the dust and the hairs, and I'm just going to increase the size of the scratches and the scale. And now when I move the white black to the furthest left, and I make this full screen, we can see that the scratches occurring are only white. If I now move this to the furthest right, we'll see that now the scratches are only appearing as black. And if I move it into the middle, we should see that we get a variation of both white and black occurring. And then we can do the exact same thing for our hairs and for our scratches. Now personally, I'm never going to have these incredibly high on their scale and their amount, because it is going to feel much too prominent and also too artificial. Normally less is more, which is why I think the 35 and the 65mm presets work really, really well. As I say, they just give a nice subtle tone to the overall film emulation. The film damage custom profile also allows us to adjust the scratches, hairs, and dust particles by a total amount. So within here, you can adjust all of their chromacity, their opacity, their period, and their total amounts. So increasing these values is going to make the scratches, hairs, and dust particles more prominent, whereas reducing it will make them less prominent. Increasing the opacity will make them more visible, and decreasing the opacity will hide them within the frame. The global chromacity will adjust the color of the film damage. And to see this correctly, I'm just going to turn all of these up really high so you can get a better indication of how that chromacity is going to alter this film damage. We've currently got it set very high, and when we play this out, you'll see that we're getting a lot of blue coming through on that film damage. If I stop that and I lower this chromacity, you'll see that we are now getting no color coming through, and it's a black and white chromacity. The global period adjustment controls how often the specific artifacts will appear in the frame. When a smaller value is selected, the artifact will be more evenly distributed, and when a larger value is selected, it will be less even. At larger values, the defect will also vary more randomly for greater realism. So once again, I'm going to deselect just the dust and the hairs and just work with the scratches. We've already got the amount and scale set high, and I'm just going to bring the white and black into the middle so we can see both white and black particles. And first, I'm just going to lower the global period. Now, when I make this full screen, you'll see that they are sitting quite close to one another, and they're evenly distributed across the frame. If I then increase the global period and make this full screen again, you'll see that they're spaced more apart and moving more randomly. So this is just a global modifier for all of these three particle parameters. So they are the new features which are available in Dehancer 7.0.0. Again, if you would like to know anything about the other areas of Dehancer, please make sure you check out my part 1 and part 2 video. If you like these videos, please give them a thumbs up and like and subscribe. And I just wanted to say thank you for all the continued support on the videos that I've been putting out and the kind words and comments that you've been putting into the chat. It's really appreciated, and I'm going to keep trying to make as much content for you all as possible. So thanks for watching, keep being creative, and I'll catch you in the next video.